Hello guys, welcome back. So today in this video, we are going to discuss the important Spring security features and the questions which can be asked from a beginner. And this session will be very informational and knowledgeable for all the developers who are a beginner or ever worked on Spring security. This video will going to help you answer all the questions related to Spring security, all the basic questions. So let's start and discuss first of all why Spring security is required in the Java applications. So anything on web like web applications is exposed to the open world of internet, and we know internet is full of threats. So security threats are also there on internet, and the Java or the web applications are vulnerable to these threats. Only authorized personnel should have the access to web pages, files and other classified resources. There are often several layers of security already implemented on web for these web applications like firewalls, proxy servers and JVM security, etc. But if access is to be controlled on application level, so application level security should also be applied. Hence, Spring security, that is a part of a Spring framework, provides a means for applying a layer of security to Java applications. So this security aspect is very important in every sense of our life related to anything which we deal with. So in this programming world also, in this application level also, we need to provide a secured feature to these applications so that user can be confident while using such applications, and data is also secure. So let's discuss what is Spring security. Spring security is essentially a bunch of servlet filters. Basically, they are a type of filters that enable Java applications to include authentication and authorization functionality. Authentication and authorization functionality is added to the Java applications using this Spring security, and this Spring security uses a type of filters, servlet filters, through which it authenticate and authorize the functionality. Next is it is one of the most powerful and highly customizable access controlled framework. Basically, it is a customizable access control framework, so we can say that it provide authentication, authorization and other security features for Java Enterprise Edition based applications. Okay, so we are generally using a Spring security in Enterprise Edition of Java based applications, and it is basically used for authentication and authorization that we need to know at this point of time. Now next is the real power of Spring security lies in its ability to be extended to meet our custom needs. Okay, so as and when required, Spring security can be added to the application, and also it provides the flexibility to meet our custom needs. Okay, for a particular application we may need the different password requirements, or authentication can be different for different applications, and it can be controlled using Spring security. Its main responsibility is to authenticate and authorize the incoming request. Basically, request come to a particular application to access a resource, any resource, it can be any resource, and including the REST API endpoints, MVC, that is model view controller, URLs, okay, and static URLs, static resources can also be there, which access the resource. So to authenticate and authorize all these things that I have included in this need to be authentic. So it filters all the authentic requests, and so that the security is not breached in this application. Okay, now next thing is, now this is the main part of our video. Which type of questions can be asked by the interviewer in the interview? So the first question can be, what are some of the basic features of Spring security? Some essential features of Spring securities include it supports authentication and authorization in a flexible and comprehensive manner. This is the first important feature that we can include in our answer. And next one is detection and prevention of attacks. There are various types of attacks which can be done on an application by the intruder. including session fixation, clickjacking, cross-site request forgery. These are all types of unauthenticated access to the application which are made by generally hackers. Integrate with Servlet API. Okay, so we can also integrate our Spring application with the Servlet API. Next is it offers optional integration with Spring Web MVC. MVC stands for Model View Controller. Next is Java authentication and authorization service is used for authentication purpose. So we need to understand that we are using a service which is based on Java, and it stands it is Java authentication and authorization service. It is called JAS. Next, it allows single sign-on for users. Okay, single sign-on, we need to understand that it allows access to the multiple applications with just one account, username and password. Means user has just single username and password, and it can access multiple applications using that same username and password. And authenticity is maintained using such single sign-on principle. Now the next question is, what is the Spring Security Authentication and Authorization? Let's see what authentication and authorization generally mean. Authentication means who are you. First of all, the application authorize that who is the person accessing this application, and next is the authority, authorization. What can you do? If you have authenticated, if suppose you are an authenticated user, you have certain privileges to use and access the application. So that is done by authorization. What can you do in that particular application? So let's understand. Authentication refers to the process of verifying the identity of the user using the credentials. Basically, there are credentials which are provided to access any application. Or generally, if we create any account on social media, you might have seen that we generally create username, and our password is also unique, right? And it's secret, and only we can access our account using that username and password pair. So that is like a simple example of authentication, and it provides access to certain restricted resources. Two steps are involved in this authenticating a user. Okay, whenever an application is doing authentication for a particular user, two steps are involved in that, namely identification and verification. First of all, it will identify, and next thing it will verify. For example, logging into a website with a username and password. That is an example of authentication, and this is like answering the question, who are you? Okay, application is asking the user who is trying to access to that application that who are you? This answer is given through authentication. Now the next principle of Spring Security is authorization. Let's understand it. Authorization is the ability to determine a user's authority to perform an action or to view data. Okay, so there are multiple level of employees in a particular organization, and there is suppose there is an application ERP. Okay, so there will be person who have access to this application and who have authority to only view the data. Okay, some will have to view the data, some will have view plus update the data. Okay, they can update as well, and some will have view plus update plus delete. They can also delete the data. So these are types of different privileges which are provided to the users of that application. Okay, now this ensures the users can only access the parts of a resource that they are authorized to access. This is done basically through database mapping. Okay, it is a deeper concept that you will understand when you will implement the Spring Security in your application. It could be thought of an answer to the question, can a user do or read this? Okay. Now the next question is, what do you mean by basic authentication? So we have basic authentication principle. The RESTful web services can be authenticated in many ways, but the most basic one is basic authentication. For basic authentication, we send a username and password. Okay, we generally send a username and password using HTTP authorization header. We have generally we have header. If you have ever used Postman, then you might be knowing there are headers, and in which we generally pass the parameters which are required to access a particular resource, okay, which enable us to access the resource. So here we are passing username and password for basic authentication. Username and password are encoded using base64 encoding. It is not done, it is not encrypted, it is just encoded using base64 encoding algorithm, okay, in basic authentication. The encoding is done secure since it can be, is not secure since it can be easily decoded. So I will show you it with an example. Like simply we are encoding it like on using base64 encoding, but it is not very secure because it can be easily decoded. Okay, so let me show you this site. Okay, this is site base64encode.org, where you need to go and just select this encode option. Okay, so when you select this, you need to enter anything that you need to modify. Oh, sorry, you need to enter here the data which you need to encode in using base64 algorithm. So I am adding this email ID, motivatingengineer@gmail.com. Okay, so after putting our data in this field, we need to press this encode button. Okay, after pressing this encode button, we got this type of encoded data. Now let's copy this and just move on to decode tab of this site. Okay, now we need to enter here our encoded data. Okay, here I have pasted this encoded data and let's decode it. So on decoding, we get the exact data which we have encoded. Okay, so we can say that it is not a very safe algorithm. Okay, so this is a basic example of base64 encoding. You can try it yourself. Okay, now this is syntax. Value is there, username, password. Encoded value is encoded using base64 and the value is passed in this. Now authorization value is there, basic encoded value, and for example authorization is basic this code which is encoded, and it will be decoded back to original username and password. Okay, this is username and this is password. So this is example of basic and authorization. Now the next question is what do you mean by digest authentication? Digest authentication is used in RESTful web services. Okay, RESTful web services can be authenticated in many ways, but the advanced authentication methods include digest authentication. We have already seen in the previous question that there is one type of basic authentication. Okay, we can say basic authentication we have seen in this question, and in the next question we are seeing the advanced authentication method, which can also be done in RESTful web services. Now it applies a hash function to username, password and HTTP method and URI in order to send the credentials in encrypted form. It is a type of encryption. Okay, and that was a type of encode. Okay, it was encoded and this is encrypted. So encrypted is always advanced type and it is more secure, okay, as compared to the encoded data. It generates more complex cryptographic results by using the hashing technique, which is not very easy to decode. So it is not very easy to decode. The syntax of this digest authentication is this is hash1, which is using MD5. We have this hash1 code, then a hash2. After that we have added this response MD5, and this example is there. This got generated by running this example. Authorization is there, authorization digest username, this is test admin, and this is Riam, and then okay, so you can see this is the type of authentication in the digest method, which is also advanced method in which encryption is used instead of encoding. Now the next question is, what do you mean by session management in Spring Security? We have sessions in Spring Security, so let's understand what does this mean. As far as security is concerned, session management relates to securing and managing the multiple user session against their request. So suppose a real scenario in which there is an application and multiple users session are created. Okay, multiple user are trying to access to a particular resource. Okay, it can happen generally. So session management relates to that part of securing and managing the multiple user session against their request. It facilitates secure interactions between a user and a service or application. Okay, generally we implement our business code in the service layer itself. Okay, so it is saying to establish a secure interaction, a secure connection between user and application, and it pertains to a sequence of requests and responses associated with a particular user. Now, session management is one of the most critical aspects of Spring Security. Okay, it is a very important, very critical aspect of Spring Security. And as if sessions are not managed properly, you need to understand here that if sessions are not managed properly, the security of data will suffer. Okay, data can be leaked, data can be breached if sessions are not managed properly. To control the HTTP sessions, Spring Security use the following options. So let's see. The first one is Spring Management Filter, and the next one is Spring Authentication Strategy. Now with these two, Spring Security can manage the following security session options. First one is session timeouts. Amount of time a user can remain inactive on a website before the site ends the session. Okay, this is done, and you might have observed, if you have ever done the net banking or anything related to banking online, and if you are not active on a particular site of any bank, then you are generally logged out automatically. So this is also a type of, we can say, security feature, so that unauthorized access can be prevented. Okay, now second point is concurrent sessions. The number of sessions that an authenticated user can have open at once. Okay, it is also a session and concurrent session principle. We have you might have observed this thing also. Whenever you log in to a particular account, especially related to banking or financial sectors like stock and all, so you might have observed that you can there is a limitation of login on multiple devices. You can't log in on two or three devices at the same time. So that is related to concurrent session. Now third is session fixation. That is an attack that permits an attacker to hijack a valid user session. Okay, this is session fixation. Now we have seen all these Spring Security features. Now the next question is explain the security context and security context holder in Spring Security. Okay, so this is our next question in this series. So there are two fundamental classes of Spring Security. The first one is Spring Context, and the next one is Spring Context Holder. So Spring Context is there in which information or data about the currently authenticated user is stored. Okay, so this we can say Spring Context, Security Context contains the data of currently authenticated user, and in order to obtain the username or any other information about the user, you must first obtain the security context. Okay, so to get the username of any information of the user which is currently logged in, okay, or currently authenticated, you need to access the security context. Now next is security context holder. Retrieving the currently authenticated principal is easiest via a static call to the security context holder. As a helper class, it provides access to the security context. By default, it uses a thread local object to store security context. So security context is always accessible to methods in the same thread of execution. Okay, it is available in the same thread of execution even if security context is not passed around. Okay, so that is a thing related to security context and security context holder. Next question is question number 7. Explain Spring Security OAuth 2. Okay, so a simple authorization framework OAuth 2.0 permits client applications to access protected resources via an authorization server. Okay, so it is like a simple authorization framework in which basically it permits client applications to access the protected resources via authorization server. There is a server through which we can access the protected resources as well. Now, using it, a client application or a third party, we can say, can gain limited access to a HTTP service on behalf of the resource owner or on its own behalf. Okay, let's see with an example or a diagram. Pictorial representation is there of OAuth architecture. So this is a resource owner and this is a client, or we can say third party. Okay, we have third party applications as well. So suppose this is a owner, resource owner, and this is resource owner, and it accesses the service. Okay, it accesses the service of third party, or we can say client, and resource owner authenticates and grants access authorization. Okay, after that what happens is, this is authorization server. It is authorization server which is authenticating the user. Then resource server is there. Now access the protected resource. The protected resource is accessed by the client using this resource server, which delegates the authorization responsibility to the authorization server. Okay, in the same security domain, all these things happen, and this authorization server issues the access taken, may refresh it later. Okay, for some time this access is granted to this client as well, or third party application. Now in OAuth 2, 4 roles are available as shown below. Okay, so there are 4 roles that we need to understand. First one is resource or owner, resource owner or user. Now the owner of the resource, that is the individual who holds the right to that resource. Next is client. Client is the application request. Application request and access token represent a user's permission for the client to access that data. Okay, so then accesses the protected resource server after receiving the access token. So access token is provided to the client to access that particular application or the protected resource, we can say. Okay, now third one is authorization server. Authorization server, after successfully authenticating the resource owner. Okay, first of all, this authorization server will authenticate the resource owner. After that, obtaining the authorization, the server issues the access token to the client. Next is resource server. Resource server is like it provides access to the requested resources. It is a server where actual data resides, and it grants access to the requested resources. Initially, it validates the access tokens, and then it provides the authorization. So this is all the concept related to the OAuth authentication, or we can say authorization. Okay. Question number 8 is, what do you mean by OAuth 2 authentication? The grant type. Okay, we need to focus on this grant type in the OAuth authentication code. Grant type in OAuth 2.0 refers to the way an application gets an access token. Okay, in what way application gets the access token, that is the grant type. Now the authorization code flow is one of the several types of grants defined by OAuth 2.0. This grant is used by both the web applications and the native applications to obtain an access token after a user authorizes the application. Okay, so it is granted to the web application and the native applications to obtain the access token after a user authorizes the application. As opposed to most other grant types, it requires the application to first launch a browser to begin the process. Now the process involves the following steps. First of all, the application opens a browser to direct the user to the OAuth server. Next, upon seeing the authorization prompt, the user approves the application request. Upon approval, the user is redirected back to the application with an authorization code in the query string. Application exchange authorization code for access tokens. Okay, so it is all the process of granting the access token. Now the next question is question number 9. What is a method security and why do we need it? Simply put, Spring method security leads us add or support authorization at the method level. Okay, Spring method security lets us to add the authorization at the method level. Spring security checks the authorization of the logged in user. Okay, Spring security first of all check the authorization of the logged in user in addition to authentication. Okay, without authentication, user can't log in the application. Now, after authentication is done, authorization is done by the Spring security. Okay, now upon login, the role of the user is used to determine which user is authorized to access the resource. Okay, now when creating a new user in web security config, we can specify his role as well. Okay, we need to specify the role of the new user whenever we are creating a new user in the web security config. A security measure applied to the method prevents unauthorized user and allow only authentic users. That is the basic phenomena of method security. And the purpose of method level security is not to facilitate users who have access, but to prevent unauthorized users from performing activities beyond their privileges and roles. Okay, as I have already discussed in the starting of this video, that there are different privileges to different users. Okay, basically they have authentication, they are authenticated user, but their authorization, their authority to use that particular application is different for different employees, or we can say different role of the user. Now, method level security is implemented using AOP, and AOP stands for aspect oriented programming, right? Now, the next question is, what do you mean by hashing? Let's discuss in Spring security. Databases often suffer from security problems. Okay, now you might have seen, if you have ever worked on MySQL, then you might have seen that there are multiple security problems when storing passwords. Now, plain text passwords can't be stored in your database, because then anyone who has access to the database would know the password of every user. That is not a good idea. Okay, so we need to implement our creativity, and also need to understand the requirement. You need to understand the requirement by considering yourself as the user of that particular application. You don't want every user you don't want anyone to see your password. So your password should be unique and limited to your access only. Okay, for that, if you are storing the password, user password, simply as a plain text password, so anyone can access, and that is a big problem. Okay, as far as security is concerned. Now, the solution to this problem is to encrypt the password in database. That is called password hashing. Okay, simply we can say the answer to this question is that password hashing is simply the process of storing the encrypted password in the database to solve the problem of accessing the password of every user to the person who has access to database. Okay, as simple as possible. Try to make things simple instead of making them complex. Now, understand with this diagram or pictorial representation. This is the input. We have a plain text message, and we have implemented it with the hash function, and after hash function, this hash value is created and it is stored in the database. Now, no one can get this code. Okay, just he or she can see the hash value in the database if he or she has access to the particular database. Okay, so by this hash function, we are just encoding it and then storing it, encrypting it, sorry. We are encrypting the input using hash function and then storing it in the database. Now, as part of general security concept, hashing involves encoding a string according to the hashing algorithm used. Hashing algorithms, like there are different types of algorithm, MD4, MD5, SHA. SHA is security hashing algorithm, like SHA-256, SHA-128. These are bits, like 256 bit, 128 bits, etc. These are some of the hashing algorithms that can be applied while encrypting the data. Okay, now the next is hashing method should take the password as input and return a hash string, and which should be stored in the database rather than plain text. Okay, right. Now, question number 11. Explain salting and its usage. Now Spring Security automatically applies salting since version 3.1. Okay, so since the Spring version 3.1 and later, the salting is applied automatically okay, on the application. Now salting is a process of combining random data with the password before password hashing. So if you are simply like hashing the password, okay, and you are storing it in database, then also there is a chance of password leak, or it can be we can say decoded or decrypted, whatever. Now salting is used, we can say just we are adding the salt to our password or random data to our password and before hashing it. Okay, now salt improves the hashing by increasing its uniqueness. Okay, so I hope you are getting it. Like we are adding salt, or we are adding some extra data, random data, and it will make the password more unique and also complex. Okay, now it is not very easy to encode or encrypt without increasing the requirements of the user, thereby reducing password attacks. So the security is a very important factor of a success or failure of a particular application. Okay, now user will not want his password to be leaked. Okay, so the security is very important in the success of an application. Hence the Spring Security is also important whenever we are working on an application. These hashed passwords are then stored in the database along with salt. Now your application will be protected from dictionary attack by using salting. Okay, salting is done, and dictionary attack can be from dictionary attack the application will be protected. With salt we can add an extra string to the password to make it more difficult for hackers to crack it. Okay, this is a very simple simple language. It has explained all the overall concept of salting, that with extra salt, or we can say the extra string is added to the password, it make difficult for hackers to crack it. Okay, like this, suppose user has made a password which is Apple. Now we have added this salt to this password, Apple YRTZD. Okay, anything can be added. It is not a very anything fixed. Okay, now we have added this. Now hashing algorithm is there working. Now hashed password plus salt is added. Okay, this is added here and it is stored in the password store. So it is a very good combination of saving the password in the database. Now next question is, what is password encoder? Password encoding is provided by the Spring Security using the password encoder interface. There is an interface which is named as password encoder, and password encoding is provided by Spring Security using this interface. Now interface defines the two methods. There are two methods which are defined in this interface. Now first one is encode. What does this method do? It converts a plain password into encoded form. Okay, and the next one is matches. It compares an encoded password from the database with a plain password that is input by the user that's been encoded using the same salting and hashing algorithm as the encoded password. Okay, now it is very simple to understand. You can I hope you have got this. Okay, very basic. Now the last video of this question, let's complete this video by completing this question. Explain abstract security interceptor in Spring Security. In Spring Security, the abstract security interceptor handles the initial authorization of incoming requests. There are multiple requests incoming on a particular application accessing a particular resource. So abstract security interceptor handles the initial authorization. Abstract security interceptor has two concrete implementations. The first one is filter security interceptor and next one is method security interceptor. What does this filter security interceptor do? It will authorize all the authenticated user requests first of all. Okay, and next one is method security interceptor. It is crucial for the implementing method level security. Okay, whenever we are implementing the security on a method level, then method security interceptor is there. Okay, and it allows us to secure our program at the method level. Okay, method level security, and this is application level security. So guys, that's all in this video. I hope you might have got a lot of information related to Spring Security, and this file is uploaded on Telegram channel, and the Telegram channel link is provided in the description of this video. That's all. Thanks for watching.